Marcus Williams froze mid-step, his worn jacket halfway off his shoulders, as the elegant woman's eyes widened in recognition. The expensive fabric slipped from his calloused fingers. This wasn't charity. It was destiny colliding with a 3-year secret. Eleanor gasped from the soup kitchen doorway, her weathered hands clutching the frame as she witnessed what she'd prayed for but never expected. The clatter of dropped car keys echoed through the empty Austin street like gunshots in a cathedral. The woman's trembling fingers traced the jacket's faded collar, the same collar she'd anonymously donated after watching a broken man bury his wife. Now that man stood before her, offering back the very coat that had started her obsession. "Find him," she whispered to herself, voice cracking, "before Richard discovers what I've done." Who was this homeless stranger who'd unknowingly haunted her dreams? And why did his simple act of kindness feel like the key to unlocking 20 years of carefully buried lies? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 years earlier, Marcus Williams had been Austin's most promising architect, his blueprints for the Children's Hospital earning national recognition. Now he sat in a rusted 1998 Chevy behind Morrison's abandoned warehouse, counting the $17 that stood between him and complete destitution. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd designed buildings that sheltered thousands, yet couldn't afford shelter for himself. Sarah's cancer had arrived like a thief in the night, stealing not just his beloved wife, but their entire future. The medical bills had devoured their savings, their home, and finally their hope. When the foreclosure notice came, Marcus had made the hardest decision of his life, signing temporary custody papers for their 16-year-old son, Tyler. "Just until I get back on my feet," he'd promised, watching his boy disappear into the foster care system with eyes too old for his age. Every morning, Marcus still reached for 2 coffee cups before remembering he drank alone now. Sarah's wedding ring hung on a chain around his neck, bumping against his heart with each labored breath. He'd kept her favorite jacket, a cream wool coat she'd worn to their first date, because it still carried traces of her lavender perfume. Across town, Victoria Sterling stood in her penthouse office staring down at the city she'd helped reshape through Sterling Dynamics. At 35, she commanded a construction empire worth billions, yet couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at her and seen Victoria instead of a dollar sign. The quarterly reports scattered across her mahogany desk told the story of unprecedented success. But the empty penthouse apartment 40 floors above whispered a different truth. Victoria's adoptive brother Richard paced behind her, his reflection ghost-like in the floor-to-ceiling windows. "The Richardson project needs your signature," he said, sliding another contract across her desk. Richard had been her protector since they'd lost their parents in that terrible accident 20 years ago. He was the only family she had left, the only person who understood the weight of building an empire from ashes. What Victoria didn't know was that Richard had installed cameras in every room of her life, watching her like a spider monitoring its web. His office safe contained more than contracts and cash, newspaper clippings about local tragedies, hospital bracelets, and a growing collection of what he called memories from people who'd gotten too close to his sister. In East Austin, Eleanor Hayes ladled soup into mismatched bowls at the community kitchen, her 82-year-old hands steady despite arthritis. She'd been serving the forgotten for 3 decades, long enough to recognize the difference between those down on their luck and those down in their souls. When Marcus had first shuffled through her doors 6 months ago, she'd seen something familiar in his eyes. The same hollow grief she'd carried after losing her husband in Vietnam. "Some folks are broken by circumstance," Eleanor often said, watching Marcus help clear tables despite having nothing himself. "Others are broken by choice. The difference is everything." The March thunderstorm hit Austin with biblical fury, turning Congress Avenue into a river of brake lights and honking horns. Victoria's midnight blue Bentley sputtered to a halt 3 blocks from her penthouse, steam rising from under the hood like incense from a cursed altar. Her driver had called in sick that morning, the first time in 5 years she'd driven herself anywhere. She sat in the leather seat, designer heels useless against the flooding pavement, watching rain cascade down the windshield like tears she'd forgotten how to shed. The charity gala had been another performance. Another evening of writing checks to causes she barely understood, while men in $1,000 suits told her how generous she was. The irony burned. She had everything money could buy, yet sat stranded like any other soul caught in the storm. Through the downpour, she spotted the bus stop's flickering fluorescent light. A solitary figure huddled beneath the meager shelter, shoulders hunched against the wind. Something about his stillness, his resignation, made her grab her purse and run. Marcus had been waiting 47 minutes for the last bus to East Austin. The route would take him within walking distance of the warehouse, though walking meant another soaking. He'd spent his final $3 on a coffee at the diner where he sometimes washed dishes for leftover pie. The manila envelope in his lap contained his 18th job rejection in 6 weeks. This one from a firm where he'd once been offered a partnership. When the woman appeared under the shelter, Marcus tried to make himself smaller, invisible. She was clearly from another world. Silk dress clinging to her frame, jewelry that caught the streetlight like captured stars. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, but even disheveled, she carried herself with the grace of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I don't suppose you know when the next bus comes?" Marcus looked up, surprised. People like her didn't take buses. People like her certainly didn't talk to people like him. "Last one comes at 11:40, he said quietly. "But in this weather," he shrugged. Victoria checked her watch, 11:35. She wrapped her arms around herself, the expensive dress offering little protection against the wind. Marcus watched her shiver and felt something stir in his chest, a muscle memory of being someone who helped instead of someone who needed help. He looked down at Sarah's coat, the cream wool she'd worn to their wedding reception. He'd promised himself he'd never let it go, that keeping it meant keeping her close. But watching this stranger tremble, he heard Sarah's voice from a dozen moments when she'd given away her lunch to homeless students, her umbrella to caught-in-the-rain co-workers, her last $20 to the single mother behind them at the grocery store. "Here," Marcus said, standing and slipping off the jacket. "Take this." Victoria stared at him, bewildered. "I can't. You need it more than I do." "No," Marcus said, stepping closer. The coat smelled like lavender and old memories, like love that had been worn thin but never broken. "I've already lost everything that mattered. This coat, it's the only thing I have left to give." His words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She recognized something in his voice, a kind of grief that money couldn't touch, couldn't buy, couldn't fix. When he draped the coat over her shoulders, she felt warmth that had nothing to do with fabric, and everything to do with the man who'd given up his only protection for a stranger. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling the coat tight. It smelled like another woman's perfume, like love that had been cherished. "What's your name?" "Marcus," he said, sitting back down. "Marcus Williams." Victoria's world tilted. She'd heard that name before, seen it on architectural plans, on the bronze plaque at the Children's Hospital entrance. This was the man who'd designed the building where her foundation held its annual fundraiser, the architect whose innovative low-income housing proposals had crossed her desk 3 years ago. "I'm Victoria," she said, reaching into her purse for a business card. "Victoria Sterling." Marcus took the card without reading it, slipping it into his jacket pocket with the resignation of someone who'd learned not to hope for miracles. The bus arrived in a spray of puddle water, its doors hissing open like the mouth of a mechanical beast. Victoria climbed the steps, turning back to see Marcus still sitting in the rain, somehow smaller without his coat. Through the bus window she watched him disappear into the storm, and for the first time in years she felt the foreign sensation of her heart breaking for someone other than herself. She pulled the coat closer, feeling something crinkle in the inside pocket. Victoria's hands trembled as she unfolded the paper hidden in Marcus's coat pocket. The bus lurched through downtown Austin, fluorescent lights flickering overhead like dying stars, but she barely noticed. What she held wasn't a business card or a receipt. It was a child's drawing, done in crayon with the careful imprecision of young hands. Two stick figures stood beneath a crooked yellow sun, holding hands. One was labeled Dad in shaky letters, the other Me. Between them floated a red heart, and at the bottom, in the earnest scrawl of a teenager trying to comfort his father, were the words, "I love you, Daddy. We'll be together again soon. Tyler." Victoria pressed the drawing to her chest, feeling tears she hadn't shed in decades threaten to spill. This wasn't just any homeless man. This was a father separated from his child, carrying his son's love like a talisman against despair. The coat suddenly felt heavier, weighted with the gravity of sacrifice and loss. She pulled out her phone and dialed her private investigator. "James, I need you to find someone tonight." By dawn, Victoria sat in her penthouse office surrounded by manila folders that told the story of Marcus Williams' fall from grace. James had worked through the night, piecing together the tragic trajectory from acclaimed architect to invisible man. The medical bills alone made Victoria's chest tighten. $347,000 for Sarah Williams' cancer treatment, every penny fighting a war they'd ultimately lost. But it was the foster care documents that broke her. Marcus had voluntarily relinquished custody of Tyler, signing papers that ripped his heart out because he loved his son too much to let him live in a truck. The social worker's notes were clinical but devastating. Father demonstrates clear love and commitment but lacks stable housing and income. Temporary placement recommended until circumstances improve. That had been 8 months ago. 8 months of Tyler living with strangers while his father fought to rebuild a life worth sharing. Victoria's assistant knocked softly. "Miss Sterling, you wanted to see the Henderson construction reports?" She waved Rachel away. The Henderson project could wait. Everything could wait. She reached for her coat, Marcus's coat, and breathed in the fading scent of lavender. Somehow, without knowing it, she'd been carrying someone else's grief for 12 hours. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Found him. Morrison construction site, East Austin. Starts work at 6 a.m. Marcus bent over a pile of rebar, his back aching from sleeping on the truck's bench seat. The foreman had hired him for day labor, $40 cash for 10 hours of lifting, hauling, and trying to remain invisible. His hands, once steady enough to draft blueprints, now trembled slightly from cold and hunger. "Williams!" the foreman shouted. "Got a visitor." Marcus looked up to see a black sedan parked at the site entrance. The woman from the bus stop emerged, but in daylight she looked different. Purposeful, elegant, clearly someone important. She wore a charcoal business suit and carried herself like she owned the world, which Marcus realized with growing dread she probably did. "Mr. Williams," Victoria said, approaching carefully, "I wanted to return your coat." She held out the cream wool jacket, and Marcus felt his stomach drop. Rich people didn't drive across town to return clothing to day laborers. Rich people didn't even see day laborers, let alone remember their names. "Keep it," he said quietly, turning back to his work. "Looks better on you anyway." "I can't do that." Victoria stepped closer, noting how his co-workers had stopped to watch. "But I can offer you something else. A job. A real one. Marcus straightened slowly, his spine protesting. Lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing. Chief architect at Sterling Dynamics, Victoria interrupted. Starting salary $200,000, full benefits, housing allowance. She paused, watching his face. And help getting your son back. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He staggered backward, grabbing the rebar for support. How do you know about Tyler? Victoria pulled the drawing from her purse, holding it gently. He loves you very much. Marcus stared at his son's artwork in this stranger's manicured hands, and something inside him cracked open. Who are you? Someone who believes in second chances, Victoria said. Someone who thinks good people deserve good things. She held out a business card, the same one he'd pocketed without reading. Victoria Sterling, Sterling Dynamics. Marcus read the card twice before the words penetrated. Sterling Dynamics. The construction giant that owned half of Austin's skyline. The company whose CEO was standing in a muddy construction site offering him salvation. This is charity, he said, his voice rough with shame. Pity. No, Victoria said firmly. This is justice. You designed the children's hospital that saved my life when I was 8 years old. You've created buildings that house thousands, shelters that protect families like yours. You're exactly what this company needs, someone who builds with heart instead of just profit. Around them, construction workers pretended to work while straining to hear every word. Marcus felt their eyes like weights, measuring his response, judging whether he'd accept handouts or hold on to pride. I sleep in a truck, he said quietly. I sleep in a penthouse and talk to an AI assistant because I have no friends, Victoria replied. We all have things we're not proud of. Marcus looked at Tyler's drawing again, at the hopeful red heart floating between father and son. 8 months of sleeping alone, 8 months of wondering if his boy had given up on him, 8 months of being nobody when he used to be somebody who mattered. Why? He whispered. Victoria smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached her eyes. Because last night in the rain, you gave me more than a coat. You gave me hope that decent people still exist. She extended her hand. What do you say, Mr. Williams? Ready to come home? Marcus stood in the marble lobby of Sterling Dynamics, feeling like an imposter in his borrowed suit. The 40-story glass tower stretched toward heaven, its walls reflecting Austin's skyline in infinite fractals of light and steel. 3 days ago, he'd been hauling rebar in steel-toed boots. Now he wore Italian leather shoes that cost more than he'd earned in 2 months. Victoria had arranged everything with frightening efficiency. The apartment lease, the advance on his salary, even the meeting with Tyler's social worker. But standing here, surrounded by men in $1,000 suits discussing million-dollar projects, Marcus wondered if kindness could really bridge such an enormous gap. Mr. Williams? A young woman with earnest eyes and a tablet approached. I'm Rachel, Ms. Sterling's assistant. She's waiting for you in the conference room. The elevator ride to the 38th floor felt like ascending to another planet. Through the glass walls, Marcus watched Austin shrink below him, the homeless camps under the freeway overpasses becoming invisible dots. He touched Tyler's drawing in his jacket pocket, a talisman against the vertigo of sudden elevation. Victoria stood at the head of a conference table, surrounded by department heads who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Her smile was warm, but Marcus caught the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers drummed against her portfolio. This wasn't just a job interview. It was a declaration of war against her own board of directors. Gentlemen, Victoria announced, I'd like you to meet our new chief architect, Marcus Williams. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Finally, a silver-haired man in navy pinstripes cleared his throat. Miss Sterling, with all due respect, we haven't had time to properly vet this candidate. His recent employment history raises questions about stability and his recent employment history, Victoria interrupted, her voice crystalline sharp, shows a man who sacrificed his career to care for his dying wife. His portfolio shows innovation that this company desperately needs. She gestured to the wall screen displaying Marcus's hospital designs. This is the man who designed Austin Children's Hospital, the building that saved my life 20 years ago. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Victoria had never mentioned being a patient at his hospital. The revelation hung in the air like smoke, adding another layer to an already complex dynamic. Richard Sterling entered the conference room with the predatory grace of a shark sensing blood. At 40, Victoria's adoptive brother carried himself with the entitled swagger of old money, his steel-gray eyes sweeping the room before settling on Marcus with unconcealed disdain. "Sorry I'm late," Richard said, taking his seat at Victoria's right hand. Traffic was murder. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he studied Marcus. "So this is our homeless hire." The words landed like slaps. Marcus felt every eye in the room measuring him, calculating his worth against their quarterly bonuses. But instead of shrinking, he thought of Eleanor's words from the soup kitchen. "Some folks are broken by circumstance, others by choice. The difference is everything. I prefer experienced in resilience," Marcus said quietly. "Homelessness taught me things no MBA program covers. How to stretch resources, how to find dignity in desperate circumstances, how to recognize the humanity in people others prefer to ignore." Victoria beamed, but Richard's expression darkened. "Touching. But this is a business, not a charity case. Our shareholders invest in profit, not feel-good stories." "Our shareholders," Marcus replied, surprising himself with his steadiness, "invest in buildings that house families, hospitals that save lives, schools that educate children. If we forget that human element, we're just moving concrete and steel around for rich men's portfolios." The room erupted in murmurs. Marcus had just challenged the fundamental philosophy of corporate construction, and everyone knew it. Victoria looked proud. Richard looked murderous. Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into work with the desperate energy of a drowning man grasping for shore. His affordable housing project became his obsession, designing structures that could house Austin's growing homeless population without looking like warehouses for the unwanted. He worked 16-hour days, partly from passion but mostly from terror that someone would realize their mistake and send him back to the truck. His relationship with Victoria evolved in stolen moments between meetings, coffee conversations in her office, shared lunches overlooking Lady Bird Lake, walks through the Memorial Garden at Austin State Hospital, where she'd recovered from childhood injuries and where Sarah had fought her final battle. "I was 8 when they brought me here," Victoria confided one evening as they stood beneath the oak trees where Marcus had scattered Sarah's ashes. "Car accident killed my parents, shattered my pelvis. I spent 6 months in this place, watching other kids come and go while I learned to walk again." Marcus reached for her hand, understanding now why she'd seemed so familiar with hospitals, why his story had resonated so deeply. "The children's wing," he said. "You were in the children's wing. Room 314, she nodded. "I used to stare out the window at the courtyard you designed, wondering who had thought to put a playground where sick kids could see hope instead of parking lots." They kissed for the first time in that garden, surrounded by the ghosts of healing and loss. It felt like coming home and stepping off a cliff simultaneously. But Richard was watching, always watching. Hidden cameras in Victoria's office captured their growing intimacy, their shared laughter, the way Victoria's face lit up when Marcus entered a room. In his private office, Richard studied the footage with the intensity of a general planning a siege. He'd spent 20 years positioning himself as Victoria's indispensable protector, the only family she had left. Now this homeless interloper threatened everything. Richard began making calls, pulling strings, activating the network of corrupt officials who owed him favors. The first attack came through Tyler's social worker, Mrs. Patricia Hendricks arrived at Marcus's new apartment unannounced, clipboard in hand and suspicion in her eyes. "Mr. Williams, we need to discuss Tyler's living situation," she said, settling into his second-hand armchair like a judge pronouncing sentence. "There have been reports about your employment, questions about the stability of your current arrangement." Marcus felt his carefully constructed world tilt. What kind of reports? Anonymous tips suggesting your job placement was obtained through inappropriate relationships, that your housing is temporary, that you may be emotionally unstable due to recent trauma. She flipped through her notes with bureaucratic efficiency. "Until we can verify these claims, Tyler's visits will be suspended." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He'd been so close to bringing his son home, so close to rebuilding their family. Now phantom accusations threatened to steal even their supervised visits. "Who made these reports?" Marcus demanded. "That's confidential," Ms. Hendricks replied. "But we take all allegations seriously, especially those concerning child welfare." That evening, Marcus sat in his apartment surrounded by Tyler's drawings. Artwork his son had created during their weekly visits, images of them fishing together, playing catch, being a family again. The systematic precision of the attack felt personal, deliberate. Someone wanted to destroy him, but he couldn't fathom why. His phone rang. Victoria's name lit the screen. "Marcus? I just heard about Tyler's visits being suspended. This is insane." "It's fine," Marcus lied, his voice hollow. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not stable enough to be anyone's father." "Don't you dare!" Victoria's voice crackled with fury. "Don't you dare let them make you doubt yourself. We'll fight this. I'll call my lawyers. No." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of worlds colliding. "This is what happens when people like me try to live in your world. The system protects itself." "Marcus, please." He hung up and turned off his phone. Outside his window, Austin glittered like scattered diamonds, beautiful and untouchable. For a few weeks he'd dared to believe he belonged among those lights. Now reality crashed back with crushing force. Eleanor found him at the soup kitchen the next morning, ladling mac and cheese with mechanical precision. She took one look at his hollow eyes and guided him to the storage room, away from curious stares. "Talk," she commanded, crossing her arms. Marcus told her everything. The suspended visits, the anonymous reports, the growing certainty that accepting Victoria's help had been a catastrophic mistake. Eleanor listened without interruption, her weathered face impassive. "You know what your problem is, son?" she finally said. "You're so busy looking for reasons why you don't deserve good things that you can't see when someone's trying to take them away from you." "I don't belong in that world, Eleanor. I should have known better." "Bull hockey," she snapped. "That girl sees something in you worth fighting for. Your boy needs his daddy. And somewhere out there, some snake is working real hard to convince you otherwise." She grabbed his shoulders with surprising strength. "Question is, you gonna let them win?" Marcus looked into her fierce blue eyes and felt something stir in his chest. Not hope exactly, but the memory of what hope felt like. Maybe Eleanor was right. Maybe the system wasn't protecting itself from him. Maybe someone was protecting themselves from what he and Victoria represented. The boardroom felt like a Roman Colosseum, complete with lions disguised as shareholders and gladiators wearing tailored suits. Marcus sat at the polished mahogany table, his hands steady despite the 47 pairs of eyes dissecting his every breath. Victoria had called an emergency board meeting after 3 anonymous complaints alleged financial irregularities in his hiring process. Richard Sterling lounged in his chair with the satisfied expression of a chess master moving pieces into checkmate. He'd spent 2 weeks orchestrating this moment, planting seeds of doubt among board members, commissioning fake background reports, bribing former colleagues to question Marcus's mental stability after Sarah's death. "Gentlemen, ladies," Richard began, his voice carrying the honeyed poison of practiced manipulation, "we have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders. Recent discoveries about Mr. Williams's employment history raise serious concerns about judgment and transparency." He activated the wall screen, displaying what appeared to be police reports, medical evaluations, and employment termination letters. Each document bore official seals and authentic-looking signatures. To the untrained eye, they painted a picture of a man spiraling into violence and instability after his wife's death. According to Dallas Metro Police, Mr. Williams was involved in 3 domestic disturbance calls in the months following his wife's death. Richard continued. 2 former employers cite erratic behavior, missed deadlines, and inappropriate outbursts directed at supervisors. Marcus felt the room's temperature drop. Board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his gaze. He recognized the sophisticated precision of the attack. Every document designed to exploit his most vulnerable moments, his grief twisted into evidence of unfitness. "These reports are fabricated," Marcus said quietly. Victoria squeezed his hand under the table, her touch the only anchor in the storm of accusations. "That's a serious allegation," Board Member Harrison Blackwell interjected. "Are you suggesting Mr. Sterling doctored official police documents?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Marcus realized the elegance of Richard's trap. Denying the charges meant accusing a Sterling family member of criminal fraud. In this room, that was corporate suicide. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against marble. "These documents are lies, and everyone in this room knows it. Marcus Williams has more integrity in his little finger than half this board has in their entire portfolios." "Victoria," Richard said with wounded concern, "I understand your emotional attachment, but we can't let personal feelings compromise corporate security. The man is unstable." "These aren't opinions. They're documented facts." "Documented lies," Victoria shot back. Her voice carried the steel of someone who'd built an empire from nothing. "I've seen Marcus's real character. He gave his only coat to a stranger in the rain. He sacrificed his career to care for his dying wife. He's everything this company should aspire to be." Richard's expression softened into mock sympathy. "Sis, I know you want to see the best in people. It's one of your most beautiful qualities. But remember what happened to our parents when they trusted the wrong person." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. 20 years ago, their adoptive parents had died in what police called a home invasion. But Richard had always insisted it was betrayal by someone they'd trusted, someone they'd helped. He'd protected her from the details, but the fear had shaped every relationship since. "This is different," Victoria whispered, but doubt crept into her voice. Marcus watched the siblings exchange with growing horror. Richard wasn't just attacking him. He was weaponizing Victoria's deepest trauma, using her parents' death as psychological leverage. The cruel sophistication of it took his breath away. "I move for an immediate suspension pending full investigation," Richard announced. "All access revoked. Security escort from the building. We simply cannot risk." The boardroom doors burst open. Tyler Williams strode in with the righteous fury of 16 years and a hacker's arsenal of evidence. Behind him came Eleanor Hayes, moving with the dignity of someone who'd witnessed 8 decades of human folly and refused to be intimidated by corporate power. "You might want to see this before you vote," Tyler announced, connecting his laptop to the presentation system. The wall screen flickered, replacing Richard's fabricated documents with something far more damning. Security camera footage filled the screen. Richard Sterling in his private office, meeting with men whose faces belonged on wanted posters. Audio crackled to life. Richard's voice clear and condemning. "I need Williams destroyed completely. Whatever it takes. The homeless angle makes him vulnerable." The room erupted in chaos. Board members shouted questions. Richard lunged for Tyler's laptop and security guards moved to restore order. But Tyler had already uploaded everything to the cloud, his fingers flying across keys with the precision of digital warfare. "There's more," Tyler announced over the commotion. More footage appeared. Richard doctoring medical records, bribing social workers, meeting with forgers in underground parking garages. 20 years of corruption laid bare in high-definition clarity. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos like a church bell. "I've been watching people for 82 years, and I can tell you this. Evil always thinks it's smarter than good. But good has something evil doesn't." "What's that?" Harrison Blackwell asked, his face pale with shock. "Good has people willing to fight for it." The final piece of evidence appeared on screen, hospital security footage from 3 years ago. Victoria Sterling, disguised in a baseball cap and sunglasses, approaching a billing office with a cashier's check for $347,000. The date stamp matched Sarah Williams's final treatment cycle exactly. Marcus stared at the screen in disbelief. Victoria had been there all along, an anonymous angel paying his wife's medical bills, watching from the shadows as he'd grieved and struggled. She'd found him at that bus stop, not by accident, but by design. 3 years of careful observation leading to that moment of manufactured serendipity. "You've been watching me," Marcus whispered. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I saw you at Sarah's funeral, watched you give your eulogy about building things that last, about love being the strongest foundation. I knew then that you were someone worth saving." Richard's carefully constructed world collapsed in real time. Board members called for his immediate termination, security moved to escort him from the building, and Tyler's evidence automatically uploaded to FBI servers through a program he'd coded for precisely this moment. But Richard Sterling wasn't finished. Cornered animals were the most dangerous, and he'd spent 20 years perfecting the art of survival. As security approached, he pulled a concealed pistol from his jacket, his mask of brotherly concern finally slipping to reveal the monster beneath. "You destroyed everything," he snarled at Victoria, the weapon trained on her heart. 20 years of protecting you, building this empire, and you throw it away for some homeless trash." The boardroom froze in collective terror. Marcus stepped between the gun and Victoria without thinking, his body acting on instincts deeper than self-preservation. This was Tyler's father, Victoria's protector, the man who'd learned that love meant sacrifice. "She didn't destroy anything," Marcus said calmly. "She just chose to build something real instead of something stolen." Richard's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Real? You want to know what's real? I killed our adoptive parents. Staged the whole home invasion because they were going to cut Victoria out of the will. Everything you have, everything you are, exists because I murdered for it." Victoria's knees buckled. 20 years of grief, 20 years of survivor's guilt, 20 years of Richard's protection, all built on the corpses of the people who'd actually loved her. Eleanor caught her before she fell, strong arms supporting a broken billionaire. "You're a monster," Victoria whispered. "I'm a brother," Richard corrected. "Everything I did was for family, and I'll be damned if I let some vagrant destroy what I built." Tyler moved with the speed of youth and desperation, tackling Richard's gun arm as the weapon discharged. The bullet shattered the conference room's window, sending glass cascading 40 stories to the street below. In the struggle, Richard struck Tyler across the temple with the gun's butt, sending the teenager crashing into the mahogany table. Marcus saw his son fall, and something primitive awakened in his chest. This man had terrorized Victoria, stolen Tyler's childhood through false accusations, and now threatened to orphan his boy completely. 3 years of grief, months of humiliation, and weeks of systematic destruction crystallized into pure protective fury. He tackled Richard with the force of desperation, both men crashing through the shattered window frame onto the building's maintenance ledge 40 stories above Austin's downtown core. Richard's gun spun away into the void, leaving them grappling on 18 inches of concrete with nothing but gravity waiting below. "You should have stayed in your truck," Richard gasped, his manicured hands clutching Marcus's throat. "I should have," Marcus agreed, bringing his knee up into Richard's solar plexus. "But someone taught me that good people fight for what matters." The sound of sirens rose from the street below as Richard Sterling, heir to an empire built on murder and lies, lost his grip on both the ledge and the last vestiges of his sanity. The maintenance ledge crumbled beneath their combined weight, 40-year-old concrete surrendering to physics and fury. Marcus felt Richard's grip on his throat loosen as they both scrambled for purchase on the disintegrating precipice. Below them, Austin's downtown spread like a concrete ocean, emergency vehicles converging with sirens that sounded like electronic prayers. Richard's designer shoe slipped on loose mortar, his body tilting toward the abyss. For one crystalline moment their eyes met, predator and protector balanced on the knife's edge between justice and catastrophe. Marcus could have let go, could have watched 20 years of manipulation and murder disappear into gravity's embrace. Instead, he grabbed Richard's wrist. "Why?" Richard gasped, his face contorted with confusion and rage. "Because Tyler's watching," Marcus grunted, hauling his would-be killer back onto stable ground. "And I won't let him see his father become a murderer." Richard collapsed against the building's facade, defeat and disbelief warring across his features. Through the shattered conference room window, police officers swarmed like tactical angels, weapons drawn and voices sharp with command. The empire he'd built on blood and lies was crumbling, but he'd lost something more precious, the last shred of justification for his crimes. Inside the boardroom, Tyler sat on the floor with blood trickling from his temple, Eleanor's weathered hands checking his pupils for signs of concussion. Victoria knelt beside them, her designer suit stained with her brothers, her adoptive brothers, victims' truth. 20 years of carefully constructed identity lay in ruins around her. "Ms. Sterling," Detective Sarah Martinez approached with the careful deference reserved for grieving billionaires. "We'll need your statement, but first, are you all right?" Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "All right. I just learned that everything I am was built on murder. That the man I trusted most in the world has been manipulating me since I was 8 years old. That my company's success came from blood money." She looked up at the detective with hollow eyes. "How exactly does one qualify as all right after that?" Eleanor squeezed Tyler's shoulder and stood, her arthritis forgotten in the face of greater pain. "Honey, you can't carry guilt for crimes someone else committed. Evil hides in plain sight because good people assume everyone shares their conscience." "But the signs," Victoria whispered. "There must have been signs. How could I have been so blind?" Tyler spoke up from the floor, his young voice carrying wisdom earned through foster care's harsh education. "Predators are good at hiding. They have to be, or they'd get caught. My dad taught me that. Sometimes the people who hurt us are the ones we trust most, and that's not our fault." "It's theirs." Marcus climbed back through the broken window, his hands bleeding from concrete and glass, his shirt torn from the struggle on the ledge. He looked like a warrior returning from battle, battered but victorious, broken but unbroken. When he saw Tyler sitting upright and conscious, his knees nearly buckled with relief. Dad! Tyler struggled to his feet, ignoring Eleanor's protests. Father and son collided in an embrace that spoke of months of separation, weeks of fear, and the primal joy of survival. I thought I was going to lose you, too. Never, Marcus whispered into his son's hair. Never again. Victoria watched their reunion with a mixture of joy and devastation. In finding love, she'd lost the only family she'd ever known. Richard's crimes had contaminated every memory, every moment of supposed protection, every gesture of brotherly care. How did one rebuild an identity from scorched earth? Detective Martinez returned with handcuffs and a warrant thick as a phone book. Richard Sterling, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, and in connection with the deaths of Margaret and William Sterling 20 years ago. The Miranda rights echoed through the destroyed boardroom like a liturgy of justice too long delayed. Richard said nothing as they led him away, his eyes fixed on Victoria with an expression that might have been love or possession or madness, perhaps all three twisted together beyond recognition. At the doorway, he turned back one final time. "Everything I did was for you," he called out, his voice carrying the desperate conviction of the damned. "Every lie, every crime, every death. It was all to protect you from a world that would have destroyed you." "You were the one destroying me," Victoria replied quietly. "You just made sure I couldn't see it." The boardroom emptied slowly, emergency personnel and investigators treating the space like a crime scene archaeology dig. Each piece of evidence told a story of corruption reaching back decades, tentacles of influence spreading through Austin's political and business establishment like cancer through a body. Harrison Blackwell, the senior board member, approached Victoria with the shell-shocked expression of someone whose worldview had collapsed in under an hour. "Ms. Sterling, the board will need to convene an emergency session. There are legal implications, succession questions, public relations catastrophes." "Harrison," Victoria interrupted gently, "go home to your wife. Hug your children. Tell them you love them. The rest can wait until tomorrow." As the room cleared, only the unlikely family remained. Marcus, Tyler, Victoria, and Eleanor, connected by trauma and choice rather than blood and law. They sat among the wreckage of corporate power, four people who'd found each other in the spaces between tragedy and hope. Eleanor broke the silence with her characteristic directness. "Well, that was something. 82 years on this earth, and I've never seen a boardroom turn into a wrestling match before." Tyler managed a weak laugh despite his concussion. "Wait until you see the security footage. I already uploaded it to 7 different servers. This is going to be bigger than that plane landing on the Hudson River." "Tyler," Marcus warned, though pride leaked through his stern tone, "we don't exploit tragedy for internet fame." "It's not exploitation, Dad. It's truth. People need to see what real evil looks like, and what real good does when it fights back." Tyler pulled out his phone, showing a social media feed already exploding with hashtags. #Sterling, Scandal, Boardroom, Brawl, Truth Wins. Besides, 3 million views in the last hour means 3 million people know you're a hero. Victoria stared at the phone screen, watching her life transform into viral content in real time. Comments ranged from supportive to skeptical to conspiracy-minded. But underneath the digital chaos, she saw something unexpected: hope. People believing that good could triumph, that justice was possible, that love was worth fighting for. "I need to ask you something," Victoria said to Marcus, her voice barely audible. "The hospital bills, Sarah's treatment. I paid them anonymously because I couldn't stand watching you suffer, but I never told you because—" She struggled for words. "Because I was a coward. I was afraid you'd see it as pity instead of love." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the revelation that his wife's final months had been funded by the woman he'd fallen in love with, creating a circle of connection that predated their meeting by years. "You saved her life," he said finally. "The experimental treatment, the extra time we had together, that was you?" Victoria nodded, tears flowing freely now. "I saw you at her funeral, watched you give that speech about building things that last, about love being the strongest foundation. I knew then that you were someone worth saving, even if it took 3 years to figure out how." Tyler wiped his eyes with his sleeve, the gesture reminding everyone that he was still just a kid despite his technical sophistication. "So, you guys were meant to be together all along. That's like something out of a movie." Eleanor chuckled, the sound carrying decades of witnessed romance and heartbreak. "Son, life is stranger than any movie Hollywood ever made. Sometimes the best stories are the ones where broken people find each other and decide to heal together." Outside the shattered window, Austin's skyline glittered in the gathering dusk. Somewhere in that maze of lights, Richard Sterling sat in a holding cell. His empire of lies finally collapsed. Somewhere else, families slept safely in buildings Marcus had designed with love instead of greed. And in the ruins of Sterling Dynamics' boardroom, 4 survivors began the delicate work of building something new from the ashes of what was. But the hardest battles still lay ahead, and not all of them would be fought in courtrooms or conference rooms. The deepest wounds were always internal, and healing those would require more than justice. It would require forgiveness, starting with themselves. 6 months after Richard's arrest, Victoria Sterling sat in her therapist's office staring at a tissue box that had become her most reliable companion. Dr. Rebecca Chen waited patiently, having learned that healing couldn't be rushed, especially for someone whose entire identity had been constructed on lies. "I keep having the same dream," Victoria whispered, her voice hoarse from another sleepless night. "I'm 8 years old again, in the hospital after the accident. Richard's there, holding my hand, telling me he'll always protect me. But in the dream, I can see the blood on his fingers. My parents' blood. I wake up feeling like I'm drowning in guilt for loving my parents' killer." Dr. Chen leaned forward with the gentle authority of someone who'd guided hundreds through trauma's labyrinth. "Victoria, you were a child. Children love the adults who care for them. It's biological imperative, not moral failure." Richard exploited that natural trust. "The guilt belongs to him, not you." "But how do I separate 20 years of memories? How do I know which moments were real affection and which were manipulation?" Victoria's hands shook as she reached for another tissue. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm even capable of genuine love, or if everything I feel is just conditioning from a master manipulator." The question hung in the air like smoke. Victoria's relationship with Marcus had grown tentative since Richard's confession, every gesture of affection shadowed by doubt. Could she trust her own emotions when her emotional compass had been calibrated by a murderer? Meanwhile, Marcus faced his own labyrinth of legal proceedings and public scrutiny. The media had transformed him from invisible homeless man to national hero overnight, a transformation that felt as surreal as his original fall from grace. News crews camped outside Tyler's school, reporters offered 6-figure book deals, and social media dissected every aspect of his life with surgical precision. He sat in the law offices of Brennan Associates, surrounded by leather-bound volumes, and the weight of justice deferred. Patricia Hendricks, the social worker who'd suspended his visitation rights, now faced federal charges for accepting bribes. The foster care system that had separated him from Tyler was under investigation. Vindication should have felt triumphant, but Marcus only felt hollow. "The state is prepared to offer a substantial settlement," Attorney Janet Brennan explained, sliding papers across her mahogany desk. "Wrongful separation, emotional distress, loss of parental rights. We're looking at potentially 8 figures." Marcus stared at the numbers without seeing them. I don't want their money. I just want the months back. The bedtime stories I didn't read, the homework I couldn't help with, the nightmares I wasn't there to chase away. Tyler, now living with his father in a modest house near the university, struggled with his own demons. The hacking skills that had exposed Richard's crimes had also made him a target for both law enforcement scrutiny and underground admiration. FBI agents wanted to recruit him. Cybercriminal networks wanted to corrupt him. At 16, he carried the weight of bringing down a criminal empire while trying to pass algebra and navigate teenage social dynamics. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't figured out how to hack Sterling's servers, Tyler confided to Eleanor during one of their weekly dinners. What if Richard had succeeded? What if Dad had given up and left Austin? Eleanor set down her coffee cup with the deliberate care of someone choosing words like precision instruments. Son, what if is the devil's favorite game. It keeps you focused on imaginary failures instead of real victories. You saved your daddy, exposed a killer, and protected the woman who's been protecting your family for years. That's not luck. That's courage. The truth about Victoria's anonymous generosity had created its own complications. Marcus struggled with the knowledge that his wife's final months had been purchased by a stranger's kindness, that their last Christmas together had been funded by money he'd never known existed. The gift felt tainted by its secrecy, beautiful and poisonous simultaneously. Victoria's public image underwent a brutal reconstruction. Business magazines that had once celebrated her as a visionary now dissected every Sterling Dynamics project for signs of corruption. Stock prices plummeted as investors fled anything connected to the Sterling name. Board members distanced themselves with the speed of politicians abandoning a sinking campaign. But the most devastating revelation came from Detective Martinez's investigation into the adoption records. Margaret and William Sterling, Victoria's adoptive parents, had left detailed instructions in their will about Richard's violent tendencies, recommendations that he receive psychological treatment, and explicit concerns about his obsession with Victoria. The documents had been buried in legal archives, suppressed by Richard's network of corrupted officials. They knew, Victoria sobbed to Marcus one rainy evening as they sat in their former conference room, now stripped of its mahogany and marble grandeur. My parents knew Richard was dangerous, and they died trying to protect me from him. All these years I thought their death was random violence, but they were murdered for trying to save me from my own brother. Marcus held her as she grieved not just for lost parents, but for lost truth. The rain outside mirrored the tears inside, Austin's skyline blurred by water and sorrow. He understood now why she'd been drawn to anonymous giving, why she'd watched him from shadows for 3 years. She'd been afraid to get close, afraid that everyone she loved would be destroyed by her toxic proximity to evil. Tyler's classmates treated him like a celebrity, which he hated, or a freak, which he hated more. His viral video of Richard's confession had been viewed 30 million times, spawning documentaries, podcasts, and conspiracy theories. He'd become the poster child for tech-savvy teenagers fighting corporate corruption, a role that felt too large for shoulders still growing into adult proportions. "I just want to be normal," he complained to his school counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez. "I want to worry about prom dates and college applications, not whether some documentary filmmaker is secretly recording me eating lunch, Mrs. Rodriguez, a veteran of teenage trauma, smiled with understanding. "Tyler, normal is overrated. You've been given extraordinary circumstances that revealed extraordinary character. The question isn't how to go back to normal, it's how to build a new normal that honors what you've survived." Eleanor Hayes became the unofficial family therapist, her soup kitchen wisdom proving more effective than many licensed professionals. She organized weekly dinners at her modest apartment, creating a neutral space where Marcus, Victoria, and Tyler could process their shared trauma without the weight of corporate politics or media attention. "Healing isn't a destination," she told them over her famous pot roast one Sunday evening. It's a daily choice to keep walking toward the light, even when the shadows feel safer because they're familiar. The Sterling Dynamics Board voted to change the company name to Phoenix Construction, symbolizing rebirth from ashes. Victoria stepped down as CEO, appointing Marcus as interim leader while she focused on therapy and the monumental task of making amends for crimes she'd unknowingly benefited from. Marcus implemented radical changes: profit sharing for all employees, partnerships with homeless advocacy groups, a commitment to affordable housing that prioritized human dignity over maximum return on investment. The financial analysts predicted bankruptcy within 2 years. The employees worked harder than they'd ever worked before. "We're not just building structures," Marcus announced at his first company-wide meeting. "We're building hope. Every foundation we pour, every wall we raise, every roof we complete is a statement that people matter more than profit." The transformation wasn't without casualties. Several major clients terminated contracts, unwilling to associate with a company tainted by scandal. Richard's network of corrupt officials, exposed by Tyler's evidence, created a power vacuum that left many projects in legal limbo. Phoenix Construction bled money and credibility in equal measure. But something unexpected happened. Smaller clients, nonprofits, community organizations, religious groups, began seeking them out specifically because of their values-driven approach. The company that had once built monuments to greed began constructing community centers, affordable housing, and healing spaces for trauma survivors. Victoria established the Margaret and William Sterling Foundation, dedicating her personal wealth to supporting families affected by domestic violence and corruption. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The money Richard had killed for was now funding programs to help his victims. Tyler started a nonprofit called Truth Tech, teaching underprivileged teenagers computer skills they could use to expose injustice and corruption. His first workshop, held in Eleanor's community center, attracted 12 kids from foster care backgrounds who understood better than most how systems could fail the vulnerable. The anniversary of Richard's arrest approached like a storm front, bringing with it media requests, legal deadlines, and the weight of unfinished emotional business. Richard himself sat in federal prison, refusing all interview requests, maintaining his silence with the stubborn pride of someone who still believed his crimes were justified by love. Victoria hadn't spoken to him since that day in the boardroom, but his letters arrived weekly, rambling manifestos of devotion and justification that her lawyers advised her not to read. She kept them in a shoebox in her closet, unopened testimony to the toxicity she was still learning to recognize and reject. As winter settled over Austin, the unlikely family that had formed in the ruins of Sterling Dynamics prepared for their greatest challenge yet, learning to live with peace instead of crisis, healing instead of survival, love instead of the fear that had defined them for so long. The hardest part wasn't fighting the monsters anymore. The hardest part was believing they deserved the happiness waiting on the other side of justice. 1 year later, the Austin State Hospital Memorial Garden bloomed with spring wildflowers, their colors painting hope across the sacred ground where Marcus had scattered Sarah's ashes and where Victoria had learned to walk again as a broken child. Today, the same garden would witness another beginning, a wedding that had taken a lifetime of pain to make possible. Eleanor Hayes stood at the garden's entrance, adjusting her new dress with the nervous pride of someone who'd been ordained online specifically for this occasion. At 83, she'd finally found her calling as a minister, having presided over 12 weddings for couples from the community center. But this one felt different. This was her family, the broken souls she'd helped piece back together through soup and wisdom and unconditional love. "You ready for this, son?" she asked Marcus, who stood beside her in a simple navy suit, Tyler's hand-drawn bow tie adding a splash of teenage artistry to the formal occasion. He'd lost weight during the past year, not from stress, but from joy, the kind of happiness that made food taste better and sleep come easier. "I've been ready for 3 years," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "Maybe longer. Maybe my whole life was leading to this garden, this woman, this chance to build something beautiful from the ruins." Tyler appeared at his father's elbow, now 17 and bearing the confident bearing of someone who'd faced down corporate corruption and lived to tell the tale. His scholarship to MIT was secured, but he'd deferred for a year to help establish Truth Tech and ensure his father's transition into married life went smoothly. "Dad, Victoria's ready," Tyler announced, grinning broadly, "and she looks amazing, like seriously amazing. I'm going to have to beat off the paparazzi with sticks." The media presence had been Marcus's biggest concern about a public wedding, but Victoria had insisted on transparency. "We've lived too long in shadows," she'd argued. "Let the world see that real love exists, that second chances matter, that broken people can heal together." The guests assembled in mismatched chairs borrowed from the community center, creating a congregation that would have been impossible to imagine a year ago. Homeless veterans sat beside tech billionaires. Foster children shared programs with federal judges. The board members who'd survived Phoenix Construction's ethical revolution mingled with Tyler's teenage hackers and Eleanor's soup kitchen regulars. Frank Wilson, now head of security for Phoenix Construction, escorted Victoria down the makeshift aisle. She'd asked him to give her away, explaining that he'd been more of a father figure in recent months than Richard had ever been, protection without possession, guidance without manipulation. Victoria wore Sarah's original wedding dress, altered by a seamstress who specialized in honoring memory through fabric. The ivory silk had yellowed slightly with age, but the lace still caught sunlight like captured stars. Around her neck hung a simple pendant, a piece of Sarah's jewelry that Marcus had given her, not as replacement, but as blessing from one wife to another. As she walked toward Marcus through the garden where she'd learned to believe in healing, Victoria felt the weight of the past year settling into peace. The therapy sessions, the legal battles, the slow work of learning to trust her own emotions, all of it had led to this moment of choosing love over fear. Tyler stepped forward to perform his role as best man and master of ceremonies, having insisted on adding personal touches to the traditional service. He'd written a speech that managed to be both hilarious and profound, celebrating his father's journey from despair to joy while honoring the mother he'd never forget. "We're gathered here today," Eleanor began, her voice carrying across the garden with surprising strength, "to witness something beautiful. Two broken hearts choosing to heal together, two separate stories deciding to become one story, two people brave enough to believe that love is stronger than loss." The vows had been written together, crafted during late-night conversations about what marriage meant to people who'd lost everything and found each other in the wreckage. They spoke of building foundations strong enough to weather any storm, of creating shelter for each other's wounded places, of designing a life beautiful enough to honor all they'd survived. "Marcus," Victoria said, her voice carrying across the garden like music, "you taught me that kindness isn't weakness, that generosity isn't foolishness, that love isn't something to be afraid of, but something to be brave enough to give away. You gave me a coat in the rain, and somehow gave me back my soul," Marcus replied with words that came from the deepest place in his heart. "Victoria, you saw me when I was invisible, valued me when I felt worthless, loved me when I didn't know how to love myself. You paid for Sarah's final months without expecting anything in return, and then spent 3 years proving that angels sometimes wear business suits." The exchange of rings brought tears that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with the overwhelming relief of finally arriving home. Marcus slipped the simple gold band onto Victoria's finger, not a replacement for the elaborate engagement ring she'd returned to Richard's estate, but a symbol of love chosen rather than inherited. When Eleanor pronounced them husband and wife, the garden erupted in applause that startled birds from nearby trees and sent ripples of joy across the hospital's healing grounds. The kiss was soft, reverent, full of promise for all the ordinary miracles still to come. The reception spilled across the hospital's courtyard, where Marcus's architectural vision had created spaces for healing and hope. Tables groaned under potluck dishes prepared by the extended family they'd gathered. Eleanor's famous pot roast, Tyler's surprisingly good barbecue, contributions from a dozen cultures represented in their unlikely congregation. Tyler stood to give his speech as the sun began its descent toward the Austin skyline, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that seemed designed specifically for this moment. "A year ago, my dad was sleeping in a truck and talking to my mom's picture every night," Tyler began, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. "Victoria was running an empire but eating dinner alone. They were both successful in their own ways, but they were incomplete. Sometimes it takes losing everything to realize what really matters, and sometimes it takes finding each other to remember how to hope." He paused, looking at the faces around him. Eleanor wiping tears with her napkin, Frank grinning like a proud grandfather, former Sterling Dynamics employees who'd become Phoenix Construction family, community center kids who'd found their own second chances through Truth Tech. "My mom used to say that love multiplies rather than divides," Tyler continued. "She meant that loving someone new doesn't diminish the love you carry for someone you've lost. It honors that love by proving you're still capable of it. Dad, you loving Victoria doesn't mean you love Mom less. It means Mom's love taught you how to love again." The evening progressed with the easy rhythm of family celebration, stories shared and memories made, laughter that echoed across grounds that had seen too much sorrow. As darkness fell, string lights appeared like earth-bound stars, creating a canopy of warmth above tables where former enemies had become friends and strangers had become family. Victoria and Marcus danced to a song Tyler had chosen, something about finding home in unexpected places, about love that arrives disguised as ordinary moments. Around them, their community swayed to music that spoke of second chances and new beginnings, of the courage required to trust again after betrayal. "No regrets," Marcus whispered in Victoria's ear as they moved together beneath the Texas stars. "Only one," Victoria replied, surprising him. "I regret that it took us 3 years to have this conversation. I could have loved you openly instead of from the shadows." "Maybe we needed the shadows first," Marcus suggested. "Maybe we had to learn how to love ourselves before we could love each other properly." As the evening wound down and guests began to drift away with full hearts and leftover cake, the new family, Marcus, Victoria, Tyler, and Eleanor, sat together in the garden where it all began. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to build something beautiful from ordinary materials. Phoenix Construction had 3 major contracts starting next month. Truth Tech had been invited to expand nationally, and the Margaret and William Sterling Foundation was funding its first community healing center. But tonight was for gratitude, for the miracle of finding each other in a world designed to keep people apart, for the sacred, ordinary magic of choosing love over fear, hope over despair, connection over isolation. In the distance, Austin's skyline glittered with promise, and 4 people who'd learned that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who chooses to stay when staying gets difficult, prepared to write the next chapter of their improbable, beautiful, completely true love story. Dear friends, Marcus and Victoria's story reminds us that it's never too late for a second chapter. At 42 and 35, they found love after devastating loss. He, a widowed father sleeping in his truck, she, a successful CEO drowning in loneliness. Their journey speaks to everyone who's ever wondered if their best days are behind them, if real connection is still possible after heartbreak, if starting over at midlife makes sense. Marcus gave his only coat to a stranger in the rain, not knowing she'd been his guardian angel for 3 years. Sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as ordinary moments of kindness. Victoria learned that true wealth isn't measured in stock portfolios, but in people who choose to stay when life gets messy. Together they prove that broken hearts can heal stronger, that love multiplies rather than diminishes, that families can be built from choice rather than just blood. Their story challenges us to believe in second chances, to recognize that wisdom earned through pain makes us better partners, parents, and friends. Whether you're 55 or 68, whether you're starting over or staying put, remember, your story isn't finished yet. What moment of unexpected kindness changed your perspective on life? Have you ever discovered that someone was helping you from behind the scenes without your knowledge? Share your stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear how ordinary moments became extraordinary blessings in your own journey.